All right, so this is going to take some time, and I know it's going to be a little bit of a long video, but I want to demonstrate how to approach a chapter in a textbook, and I want to teach you how to study it. Because every professor loves to say, study, come prepared, prepare for class. They never teach us how. They never show us how. So on the first day of class, I'm going to talk in more detail about the list of steps in this process, but I want to give you a video demonstrating it on a portion of a chapter so that you can see how I do it and try it out for yourselves. There's a million ways to study. This is not the only way. It's not probably even the best way, but it's what I do. And I think that doing it the way that I show you is going to promote mastery of the material and long-term memory. And that's the goal. That's my definition of learning, is moving things from short-term to long-term memory and being able to access them when you need them to take care of patients. So, honestly, this word study has a lot of negative baggage. I am going to teach you and think about how to teach you to learn. I'm going to use this word because it's the word that everyone uses, but what we're really doing here, studying equals learning, right? And like I told you in my syllabus, you got two goals: to get a good grade and to get yourself ready to take good care of patients. And that's what I want to help you lay the foundation for, okay? So I'll get started. I never read a chapter from beginning to end. This chapter 24, digestive system, is about 54 pages long. If I tried to read this thing, I'd get frustrated and exhausted. I wouldn't retain very much. And when I went back to study the material, I wouldn't have any tools or any framework or plan to do it. So what I do is I start with the summary in the back, and I read it. If it's my first time through the information ever, I'll just read the headings. I'm not reading all the words. Just the purple: anatomy of the digestive system, functions of the digestive system, histology of the digestive tract, mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, serosa, adventitia. And I start there, and I do that for this whole 4 pages or so. That really takes only a couple minutes. I save this pretest, these review and comprehension questions to test myself later to see my knowledge base and how it's doing. I wouldn't use it quite yet, especially if it's your first time through it. So I go through that, okay? Another way to do this step is to come through the chapter and read the section headings. And while you're at it, glance at the diagrams and say, all right, so, we're talking about peritoneum, I might read the description of a diagram, peritoneum and its mesenteries. I might glance at it, but I am not reading it right now to learn to memorize all this. I'm trying to get the overview, the roadmap, so that I can follow along as I'm reading this chapter and not feel like I'm being dragged along behind. Okay, so that's what I do. All the headings, number 1. Okay, sorry. I know this is a weird view, but I want you to see this book. I want you to see how I'm doing it. Okay, so this is the first of 3 stages of reading a chapter: before you read it, during, and after you read it. Before you read it, this is previewing, okay? Chapter headings, subheadings, charts, pictures, graphs, bold words. I might glance at the bold words at this point. I wouldn't get too caught up in it though, mastication, reflex, or whatever. That's not what this is for, okay? Another important part of previewing. Now, at this stage, having gotten the lay of the land, and I'm ready to start to dive in, I want to know the learning outcome that this book outlines before I read the meat and potatoes of it. So I'm just going to use this as an example. Functions of the digestive system is section 24.2. The learning outcomes. After reading this section, you should be able to describe the major functions of the GI system and state which digestive functions occur in the different regions of the digestive tract. So now I know what their goals for me are. And even more important and even more useful, especially for you studying for a test, is going to be this section: assess your progress. these questions at the end are how I know for myself I'm comfortable with this information, and I'm using this as a guide. Do my students understand this section? So I'm not going to ask you these questions on the test, but if you can answer these questions, you can answer my questions. So the next thing I do after I read the headings and I'm ready to dive in, assess your progress. Not for every section, but the one I'm about to tackle. Describe each of the functions involved in the normal functions of the digestive system. Explain the 3 types of propulsion through the digestive tract. What's the difference between mechanical and chemical digestion? What digestive functions occur in the stomach and the small intestine? Now I know what to keep my eyes and ears out for as I'm going through this. This is really important because there's plenty of detail and words in these paragraphs that I gloss over and I do not try to remember. There's plenty of stuff in here that's FYI and excessive detail. But these questions are a great guiding, they're a guiding star. Okay, so I'm going to jump in now and show you how I read some of this. The major functions of the digestive system are listed in table 24.1. This is table 24.1 over here and described here. So the major functions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 that it goes through. So I wrote 8. The 8 major functions, right? Or 8 major functions. Number 1, ingestion, the intake of solid food or liquid food into the stomach. The normal route of ingestion is through the oral cavity, but ingestion is solid or liquid food going into the stomach, okay? So I'm thinking to myself, what if someone has a G tube or an NG tube, where a tube going through the abdominal wall directly into the stomach and tube feeds are squirted in, or tube feeds are squirted down a tube that goes from the nose into the esophagus? Is that ingestion? Yeah, that's ingestion too. I'm not going to test you on NG tubes and stuff, but I'm just telling you, I'm thinking about this broadly. I'm trying to take more steps in my own brain and apply this information, and I'm trying to think, someday I'm going to be taking care of a patient with an NG tube, right? Number 2, mastication. Mastication, if I'm reading this the first time, I don't know what mastication is. The process by which teeth chew the food in the mouth. So it's chewing. Digestive enzymes cannot easily penetrate solid food particles and can work effectively only on particle surfaces. It is vital, therefore, that solid foods be mechanically broken down into by mastication into smaller particles to increase the total surface area. Okay, so when I read that, I said, okay, now I know mastication is chewing, and I tie anatomy to physiology. The hard, teeth and molars and the muscles of mastication, the muscles of chewing, all of the facial muscles that chew, all of those have a purpose for the function, physiology, right? Effectively break down, so that digestive enzymes effectively break down food, right? You guys, I'm explaining this a lot. You guys are going to be able to make these connections much quicker, but I'm verbalizing it to show you this is what I want you to do. I don't want you to just read this and say on to the next paragraph. I circled mechanically because I remember it asked me the difference between mechanical and chemical digestion, and so I circled mechanically. And then finally, I want to show you this is an important idea. The purpose is to increase the total surface area of food for digestion. But that idea is broken up over 2 lines, and I'm a super visual person, and I want to be able to look at something and take a snapshot of it in my brain so that I can remember that. So what I like to do is take whatever's at the end of this line and I write it in the margin, and that underline the whole thing in one chunk. So I don't know if you can see it, but it's an up arrow. Increase total surface area. And there's a lot of areas in this book that's helpful because the publisher breaks it up however they do, but the idea gets broken up. Some people like to have it in one place. It's helpful, okay? Number 3, propulsion. Propulsion, I remember it said, what are the 3 types of propulsion? So that perked my ears up. Now here they are. Boom, boom, boom. 1, swallowing. 2, peristalsis. 3, mass movements. I don't know the details of these yet. I just know their names, but I know I want to memorize these because it's a list. So 1, swallowing. And I'm not looking back, I'm trying to remember it. I'm trying to quiz myself, even though I just read it. 2, peristalsis. Okay, 3, what was 3? So I don't remember 3, so I'm going to go back and find it. Mass movements. Mass movements, that's right. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, boom. Now, I've been through this before, right? So I know these 3, but I'm trying to show you what it would be like if I was looking at this information for the first time. Okay, so I know this is a list. I know that teachers love to test lists. I know there's an assess your progress question about it. So I wrote it over here because I wanted my hand to write it out. From my brain, into my eyes, through my brain, down my arm, through the pen, onto the paper. I see it here, I feel it. That all is better than me just reading it and skimming over it once or twice. Okay. Okay, and so I'll do that for this whole section until I hit assess your progress. Then I'm going to go through, and without looking, I'm going to try to answer all of these. Explain the 3 types of propulsion through the digestive tract. Now at least I need to be able to say them. Maybe I'm not ready to explain everything yet, but I know that's where I'm going. And when I go back to review, I know where it is, okay? I know what diagrams apply to it. So this is how I go. This is how I go through. I use the book, in my favor. I use all of the features of it. I'm not afraid to write in it. If you're gonna try to return your textbook at the end, slap a Post-it note on there, and you can take them off later. But get into the book, chew it up and digest it. But seriously, do not just read it beginning to end. Because if it's me, I could read these pages and stop and say, what the heck did I just read? I may not have remembered anything if I just read it. Okay. When it comes to highlighting and stuff like that, if you're highlighting more than 20% of these words, you're probably not being selective enough. The purpose of highlighting is, like, my goal at the end of all this is to be able to sum this stuff up in 2 or 3 sentences and teach it to someone else. So that's why I highlight, so that I remember the important ideas that I have to pass along. I'd never recite that whole paragraph. Okay. Okay, so this is the second big section I told you about. There's before you read the chapter, and there's during when you read the chapter. This during, you don't have to do it for the entire chapter. You can break it up when you do it this way. And now I can come back later and say, all right, section 24.2, I got a good grasp on it. I've got a good starting point, and it's not totally cold. All right, next, or last, is after you read the chapter, there's a couple of things that you should do. One is recount. You could also say teach. You could also say quiz or explain, but you're recounting what you've learned and what you've read. And it has many benefits, especially if you do it with another student. It's dual benefit. They get another pass through the information, and you get a chance to bring it up from your memory and build those pathways. Every time you engage in quizzing and spaced practice recall, it strengthens the neuron connections that are involved in long-term memory of that subject. So it's very important to quiz each other and to teach this. Even if it's in your car, you're explaining it out loud, but ideally to somebody else. Okay, so that's recounting something. And so what I might do is say, hey man, I'm gonna explain peristalsis to you, and I'm gonna do it by drawing this diagram myself. So here's a nice diagram, where I'd say, like, if I was doing my deep dive in this chapter, I'd get into this diagram and I'd say, okay, number one, here's the bowel, here's a food bolus, here's mouth, here's anus, this is the direction. A wave of smooth muscle relaxation moves ahead of the bolus, ahead, allowing the digestive tract to expand. All right, so number one, smooth muscle ahead or downstream relaxes to accommodate or expand the food bolus, and it happens downstream or ahead. Number two, a wave of contraction of the smooth muscle behind the bolus propels it through the digestive tract. So a wave of contraction this time behind the bolus propels it. So you'll see I wrote here, number one, ahead, expand, relax. Number two, contract, behind, propels. So if I looked at this little thing when I went back to review, I should be able to look at that and use that to explain this diagram. And I'd probably even draw it for him and I'd say, look man, like here's a piece of bowel, here's a food bolus. This is upstream, this is downstream, this is mouth, this is anus, it's going in this direction. The first thing that happens is actually a wave of relaxation occurs in the wall of the small bowel downstream of the food bolus, so that it has room. Okay. The second thing that happens upstream of the food bolus is a wave of contraction. It pushes the food bolus downstream. It pushes it distally. And I'd use those words. The wave of contraction occurs proximal to the food bolus, which the result is proximal movement or propulsion of the food bolus. You see what I mean? And for me, one, that gives me a chance to recall, to pull it out of my memory and use the information in teaching it to someone. It benefits him because he gets to hear it. It benefits me because I feel good. And I say, God, I'm making some progress here. I'm learning something. And finally, for the two of you, this might expose knowledge gaps. He might say, okay, all right, man, that's cool, but where in the wall of the bowel is the smooth muscle? And he might quiz me. And I'd say, shoot, I can't remember which layer. Man. And I make a little note of that, or I go and find it for myself. Or I use this little diagram over here and I figure it out for myself, right? And it's painful when knowledge gaps are exposed, but isn't it nice to know it now instead of on test day, right? It's very important to do things that expose your knowledge gaps, and the best way to do it is by teaching it to someone. All right, finally, the last part, before, during, and after. The other part of after is review. Review many times. Okay, what I just did, all this process, and I'm taking notes, and hopefully once, because you're not going to have time to do that more than once in 8 weeks for this whole chapter, okay? So I want to do it right the first time once so that I can go and review. There's lots of things to do to review, and I've hinted at some of them already, but assess your progress is a great way. Ask yourself, ask someone else. Draw out the diagrams. Can I teach this myself? Do I understand it? Review the notes you've taken from my lectures and from the book. At the end of these chapters, there are questions. These are good. You are not going to see these questions on my test, but you are going to see this material. And if you can answer these questions, you can answer my questions. Okay. As you're going through, you're going to see these blue boxes called predict. Predict. If you place the pin through the greater omentum, through how many layers of simple squamous epithelium would the pin pass, you're supposed to not necessarily know that at some of these stages. It maybe didn't say the answer explicitly, but you're supposed to apply it or take it to the next step. So I know the greater omentum is a layer of peritoneum folded back on itself. And I know that a layer I know that it's a layer of mesentery folded back on itself, and I know that a mesentery contains 2 layers of peritoneum. So I know the answer to this question is 4. And even as I explained that just now, I'm distracted, or I haven't gone over it in a while. You saw I didn't say it exactly quite right. See, that's beneficial to me, regardless. Even if I mess something up, I get benefit. Okay? So important. Predict. Assess your progress. There's going to be quizzes on Blackboard. You know, we'll go over all of this plenty together, but I just want you to know that the final stage of that is going to be a review. And that's what you're going to do multiple times. Not read all of these words multiple times. Okay, that's not a good use of your time, and it won't promote mastery and long-term retention. So I hope this is helpful. I know it's 20 minutes of your time, but I think if you apply these ideas and practice them, that it's going to help you do well on the test and get a good grade. I think it's going to help lay a strong foundation of anatomy and physiology knowledge that's going to help you take care of your patients.